Welcome to Canada's podcast, the number one podcast for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So, Michael, welcome to Canada's podcast. Nice to have you on. And as I usually say, let's kick off by you telling us a little bit about who Michael DeVenney is and your background and why you're here on Canada's podcast, the number one entrepreneurial podcast in Canada.
Well, I'm really happy to be on the show. That's the first thing. I appreciate it. And I always say I'm a unique combination of things. So I'm an entrepreneur. Inside of me is probably an economic developer and an analyst. And I also have a mental health issue. So I have PTSD, chronic form. Mm-hmm. And that has developed over the years. And it makes being an entrepreneur quite a bit more interesting. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest reasons I'm very open about it is I wanted to show people that you could be just as creative, just as effective, just as productive, having a mental health challenge as anybody else would. Mm-hmm. And it's not really a great way to look at it, but I think when I went through a pretty severe depression about 6 years ago, it was a positive inflection point for me. It really opened me up to what life, I think, is about, what business is about, mm-hmm. and how I can have a much more meaningful impact going forward. That's kind of where I'm at.
So, I looked at your background, and you certainly kind of were pretty established in the corporate world, and in the early part of your life. What made you become an entrepreneur? Because you had a very good position in sort of the finance sector kind of thing.
I'm a very difficult employee. So I like my independence, not just flexibility, but I like independence. So I was constantly coming up against the walls that were around me. And I am someone who always has ideas. Mm-hmm. And I like to pursue those ideas, even though sometimes many of them don't really go the way you'd hoped. Mm-hmm. And within the corporate world, that's not really the room that I was able to have. And I felt that that going the entrepreneurial route was the best path for me. Mm-hmm. I definitely missed the income that I used to have, but I'm definitely I enjoy the ability to test new ideas, to see what's going to work, to try things out and see what happens. And that's kept my life a lot more interesting. And the businesses I've had have done well. So all in all, it's been a good journey.
Well, that journey, tell us a little bit more about that entrepreneurial journey. I personally think entrepreneurs are wired a little differently. You jumped out of corporate world. There was something there that made you do the jump. What was that? What was the desire to take on risk on your own back and build something?
I think to a great extent, I like being responsible for myself. I saw different ways to do things. It didn't fit within the corporate world. And I felt there was value in what I thought was the right direction to take. And I'm quite comfortable with risk. I've always been that way, and felt that I'd rather have the freedom to pursue things and fail if I had to, but to at least try them. And I didn't want to spend a life in a box. And I I really like being able to color outside the lines. I like being able to work the way I want to. I hate asking for permission. So that never fit very well. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was worth the risk.
Mm-hmm. So, let's talk about where you're at in life. We've talked about mental health, and just for those that kind of jumped in on this, you're one of a couple of entrepreneurs as well as BDC that we're interviewing kind of as part of a mental health and wellness special. That I think just to let other entrepreneurs know that that although they're resilient and driven people, they can't always avoid mental health issues. Maybe you can just sort of really focus a little bit on that and how you've fought that and worked through it and built yourself, a solid business, basically.
And the journey for me, there's always been a mental health issue there. I just never wanted to admit it or deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
I've had depression incidences since I was in my late teens.
Mm-hmm.
I felt the way to deal with that was to work longer and harder hours. So I've always been, as most people would say, fairly driven in terms of working towards something and doing everything I had to do to get there. 70 hours a week never bothered me, or how I felt never bothered me. It was probably even 20 years ago that I first experienced kind of a deeper bout of depression. And the answer for me at that time was medication and opening up a second business. Mm-hmm. And I felt if I had more things to take up my time, I would have time to think about what was going wrong. Mm-hmm. So I put everything I had into the second business. And about 6 years ago, everything really came to a head. Mm-hmm. So I have PTSD. It's a complex form from chronic childhood abuse. And I've also made up my mind I'm going to be very open about it, because unfortunately not a lot of people talk about it. And I think the more that we talk about it or open about it, the less stigma that's attached to it, and more people understand what it's like. 6 years ago, I went through a really severe depression despite the success of the businesses that I had. And someone asked me the other day, do I have any good memories? Looking back at the businesses I had before. And the sad thing is, I started laughing about different stories that experiences I had in those businesses. Mm-hmm. And what struck me as sad is that I never took time to enjoy the journey when I was there. I was always focused on what was next, what had to be done, what do we have to reach for. And just nothing was ever seemed to be enough. And that had a lot to do with my psychology. But mm-hmm. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are like that. We're really trying to show that we can do something. Mm-hmm. The depression 6 years ago, honestly, took me out. It was just at a point where I couldn't function and run the businesses. So I ended up selling one business to my business partner and the other one to my employees at that time. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I was left with no business. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I was weak. I felt that there was something wrong with me. And inside of me is this analyst, as I mentioned. So within about a month, I thought, well, I have to know, is it just me or are there other people like me? So I launched the Mindset Project, which was a research study into entrepreneurs' mental health and decision-making. Mm-hmm. And I look back now and I can't believe I got 425 entrepreneurs to take an hour to answer surveys. And what came through to me very quickly was, boy, I was not alone. So I was in good company. And in fact, it's one of the more prevalent professions where people will face mental health challenges. And that started me down the road of, why do so many entrepreneurs face anxiety, depression, and other types of mental health issues? And what really hit me was, it was the way we work. We're so closely identified with the business. It almost becomes a fusion. Like, a lot of people will identify with them being a broadcaster, with them being an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor. For entrepreneurs, it's a fusion. So I am the business is me. So if things are going well, I feel good about myself. if things start to go south, I don't feel so good about myself. And if things fall, you fall with it. So that was something that really hit me. And then it was the expectations, like the expectations we put on ourselves. No one ever told me we had to grow by 25% or whatever it is a year. That's something I believed I had to do. And I always thought that whenever, like if you called and said, Mike, I need this by Monday, yeah, I can do that. No problem. Knowing full well, I don't know when I'm going to get that done, but I'll do what I have to do to get there. So all that together really got me thinking about, we really have to have better working environments. Like we really have to treat ourselves better. And because the incident rate of depression, particularly for entrepreneurs, is 4 times that of the general public. So it's definitely something that we hit, and we also isolate and don't talk about it. Mm-hmm. So the new business I started within 6 months of me coming out of the other two, and someone said, why couldn't you have just taken a job? I said, that's just not who I am. So I started another business called WorkInsights, where we really focus on measuring the working environment and understanding how to shape it more proactively so we can both have performance and well-being at the same time. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of a long way around, but that's really how I got where I am today. And I have to say, I did expect when I did the Mindset Project, I had this vision of all entrepreneurs kind of standing with me and saying, yes, like this is what I face too. What I found is that no one wanted to stand with me. And so people would talk privately, but they would not talk publicly. So there's this concern that if I actually am open about the challenges I'm facing and the struggles that I feel, then investors will question me. Mm-hmm. Clients can question me. Teams will question me. And I understand that and I appreciate it. And that's one of the unfortunate aspects of kind of this Dragon's Den life that everybody seems to feel we have to lead. Mm-hmm. And when I started the new business, I wanted to be really open about who I am, what I'm going through, and really show that I can still be successful. I can still be creative. I can still be productive. In fact, I'm more so now than ever. My team know everything about me. They're not my therapist, but I wanted them to understand that if I'm having an off day, it's got nothing to do with them. And in fact, it's created this really trusting environment where I always say we have conversations, not meetings. And they're open.
So you've gone through a lot, okay? I'm just sort of wondering, having, this audience, the audience that listens to us, that looks at us, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that is there anything that you can kind of distill down into, how you've overcome the challenges, the health challenges that you've met to keep growing and, keep going and growing, if you like, in terms of, another entrepreneurial, exploit, if you like.
I think a lot of it has to do with, I try really hard to be present. I don't succeed a lot. Like part of the entrepreneur is always looking ahead. Mm-hmm. and your mind is always on a lot of different things. And I really hesitated with meditation because all I was ever doing was making lists in my head when I was supposed to be meditating. So I questioned, how it would work for me, but it actually does. I meditate every day now. Mm-hmm. But more than anything else, it was finding the right therapist. And I'm going to be a bit different probably than others in this one, is that a lot of times the first stop that people will make is to your GP, who doesn't generally have time. And as soon as they hear, I'm not sleeping like I used to, I seem to be, ruminating and up all the time. So, well, let me take the edge off. Here's a prescription for an anti-anxiety, antidepressant, it'll be fine. And all of a sudden we're on medication. I'm on a medication that I'm addicted to, and I'm going to have a really hard time getting off of it. So I think what entrepreneurs need to do is, if you find yourself being tired, even when you haven't done anything. So when you get up in the morning, you feel really tired. That's not a good sign. If you're not just worrying, but you're ruminating, you're thinking about what you could have done, should have done, will do, won't do, what's going to happen, what do they think? So when you're starting down those roads of just that constant chattering, there's probably something going on and you're starting down a road. The greatest thing about going down that road is you can turn around at any point. I think finding a therapist to talk to, finding someone that you can just be open and honest about everything that's going on, makes a huge difference. And it can be a challenge finding the right therapist. It's got to be someone you trust and someone you can just be open and honest about. And sometimes a lot of entrepreneurs will say, but they won't understand my business. They don't have to understand your business. They just have to understand you. And I think that would be the biggest thing that can happen that would make the difference. From there, it's putting in place good habits. So exercise, eating, and sleep, and the things we never do for ourselves. Take time for ourselves.
So amongst all of this, I ask this question a lot. Is there something, what's the best piece of advice that you've received that you keep on using, that you keep on going back to?
So one that I just went back to this week again, being active and outside makes the biggest difference, I think, of anything. It's one of the simplest things you can do, and it's one of the easiest things not to do. And I weighed about 50 pounds more than I do now. And I never, was an active exerciser. And when I went through the depression, I happened to meet this really, really bright young guy who said, I'll help you. And he said, but you have to invest the time. So I became a cyclist, and I never thought that was something I would ever end up doing. I absolutely love cycling. And it's something I always had as a big part of my life. I lost 50 pounds, and I always called it cycle therapy because, when I was on the bike, things were better. And just being out. So hiking has also been a big thing for me. Something happened this summer. I started to slide into another depression. And sadly, the first thing I gave up was the bike. And I look back and I can't believe I did it. And it's only been the last week or so that, I've been back on the bike. And it's funny how it actually gave me that little sense of agency about my own life, that it's one thing that I own, that I got this time for myself. So if there's one piece of advice I would give entrepreneurs, it would be to make that time to be active, and particularly if it can be outside. There's just something, my mother had this old saying, get out in the air and let the wind blow the stink off. And there's a lot of truth in that just getting out and feeling the air, getting the sun, whatever it is, it does make you feel better.
Okay.
The second thing is to talk to somebody, whether it's a therapist or whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member. A lot of times friends and family members will try to fix you. They've got this, there's nothing malicious. They just want to help. So they often I always say, fix you. And I don't want to be fixed. I just want to be able to talk. So having that time to talk and having that time for yourself, those are the two biggest things you can do for yourself.
That's really good. I think, with the pandemic or anything, the last 6 months that we've all been, not enjoying, if you like, is there anything you can sort of give on that in terms, we are at a very, bad time for many of our entrepreneurial colleagues. Is there anything you can sort of suggest to them that may that you may have found useful in your journey?
Yeah, I strongly feel that although the physical health and the economics have been horrendous, the lasting impact from the pandemic will be a mental health impact. I think it's affected people, particularly young people, way more than we understand right now. And depending on how the winter goes, I think it could, have an even heavier effect. I think one of the biggest things that I would really try to encourage entrepreneurs right now, like as I mentioned, we associate ourselves so much with the business. Right now, it's really tough. There's some businesses that are doing well because of what placement or position they're in the sector. There's a lot that are going through some really challenging times. To be able to separate yourself from that it's not you, it's the business. So finding ways to get that separation is really important. Sadly, there'll be businesses that will fail. That doesn't mean that you are a failure. There's going to be a lot of businesses that are facing downturns and not, getting the capital, getting the revenues that they had hoped or had planned for. And again, that's not you. That's the landscape we're in. So I know right now, we launched our product in February, like a month before the shutdown, and I thought, could have been better timing on that one. But actually, we've had sales. And I have to watch myself because, people will say, well, you've done okay, like despite the pandemic. And my first response has always been, but not to the level I'd hoped. And I've changed that lately. I'm like, God, you can't give it up, can you? So it's looking at, we've done okay. We've made it through. And, we're positioning ourselves for next year. And, and again, like everything you can do to separate your identity, like who you think you are, from the business, I think the safer places you're going to be in, because you're looking at it as a thing, as a business. It's something that's really important to you, but it's not you. So that way, no matter what happens, you can recognize that you've got your own value, and this, whatever has happened, has been because of the pandemic, and you can make the right decisions.
That's super, super, super input. Michael, it's been a great session. I always say, having people get a hold of you, if they're listening to this, they may want to connect with you by email, whatever you feel is the right way for them to connect with you, basically.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk to people, and always open. The website is WorkInsights.io. And there'll be a contact there to get me. I have the longest email probably around, so it's always hard, but it's I'll give it anyway. It's mdevenny@blutodevenney.com. So I think it's probably easier just to go to the website, and there's a contact there, and that'll come through to me.
Okay.
So workinsights.io is the easiest place to find me.
Okay, Michael, look, thank you for coming on. I'm sure a lot of people will have the benefit of listening to this, and it's been really, really useful for me as well. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, Philip, and thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.